So today I wanted to go back over making assignments between the caregiver and because in the state of North Carolina, we have some very specific rules that we have to follow when we make those assignments. When we take in a client, we do their assessment. There's certain things we look at relative to that client. And then when we assign the caregiver or in-home aide, whatever, however you would like to call those individuals, we have to keep in mind what those people, what the client actually needs and what those individuals are capable of doing according to your licensure rules. Your licensure rules are what's governing this. Now, sometimes we have people from other states on the call, and many states are not as strict as North Carolina. However, we're in one of the strictest states about who can provide care to whom from a client caregiver standpoint. And one of the ways that the state of North Carolina really governs that is they make sure that there is a registered nurse in charge in an agency where you do hands-on care. So it is upon the registered nurse that these determinations are made, and they the training so that they can actually make sure that it's done in a proper manner. So what I did, you all, is I went to the home care agency licensure rules for the state of North Carolina. If you're on the call and you're from another state, this is probably a higher standard, but won't hurt for your agency to operate in this way. The 5 ADLs for the state of North Carolina, activities of daily living, are mobility, eating, bathing, dressing, and toileting. The reason I put that up there is because when your RN goes out to do that initial assessment of that client, these are the 5 areas that she must address and assign a category to that. For mobility, do they need limited assistance, extensive assistance, or whatever? But keep these 5 ADLs in mind. Your care plans should all have a way to address each one of these ADLs in order to be a compliant care plan with the state of North Carolina. With our rules and regulations, this information that I'm showing you here, it's actually in the definitions of the home care licensure rules, which is a kind of different place to find that. I remember there was a time I was in the business for almost 20 years. So initially when we started, we didn't have these parameters to work with. So when they added it, they put it in the definitions, and all the definitions are right at the beginning of the home care licensure rules. So they've defined limited assistance as tasks assigned that require hands-on assistance half the time or less. So that would mean if it's mobility, does that client require hands-on assistance half the time or less? However, if they require extensive assistance, that would mean that they either are totally dependent on someone to help them to be mobile, to turn over in the bed or get in the wheelchair. Would that mean, it would, however, mean that they would need more than 50% assistance. They may need 70% or 100% assistance. So that's how limited and extensive assistance is defined. You all, this is very subjective because when that nurse comes out to do that assessment, she sees how the client can move. And so she has to make that determination right then. So this is why it is so important to have full communication with your aides. The nurse does the assessment and then the aide goes out and starts working and she's like, well, she can really get up. You know, she can pivot. And the nurse may not have seen her do that, or maybe it was he or she. It may have been a bad day as well. So it's always so important to have a good direct line of communication between the assessing nurse and those providing the care, because that nurse is delegating the task involved with mobility, eating, bathing, dressing, and toileting. She's delegating those to the aide. And it may not be perfect, but that's when you need to communicate. So I decided to go a little bit further into extensive assistance. Extensive assistance, according to the North Carolina rules and regulations, is they require extensive assistance in 2 or more activities of daily living. These are the activities of daily living that I just mentioned. So if in more than two of these, they need extensive assistance, that means more than 50% of the time they need assistance, then that would mean that client, that would be coded as extensive assistance, and that client would probably have to have an aide on the nurse aide registry. It could not just be a PCA, some of you call it a PCA, or just you can have two types of in-home aides. Let me just clarify that. If you have an in-home aide license, you can have in-home aides that are on the nurse aide registry, and they can handle these extensive assistant clients, but you can also have in-home aides that are involved with bathing and dressing and doing all of these things, but they're not on the registry. However, if that client has more than two of these ADLs that requires extensive assistance, then those aides not on the registry should not be working with that client. So it's a lot of ins and outs to remember, but it's very important. Also, if you have a client that needs an in-home aide to perform nurse aide 2 level tasks, that would be things like they have a catheter. There's a list of nurse aide duties that agencies can do. I think there's 5. It used to be 5. But if you have someone that needs a higher level of care at a nurse aide 2 level, if it's one of those tasks, then that aide needs to be on the nurse aide registry. And then this one is another one they added, is that if they need extensive assistance in one ADL, say they need extensive assistance in dressing, and then they have a cognitive impairment. Now that would be something like dementia or whatever. They may be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but a cognitive impairment or a medical need, which could be extensive pain. I think they clarified that. So these are a lot of areas that the nurse needs to be looking at, and it's determined by each client. So that's why I'm showing you all this, to be sure that you have the correct level of caregiver assigned to the client. And I've mentioned this before to you all. Sometimes, most of the time, we get these clients in, they need some help. And maybe you put an aide in there that is not on the nurse aide registry. Well, something happens, maybe they fall or they get the flu or they go in the hospital. When they come back out, they're not able to walk. The nurse would go out, reassess them if they've had a major change. And it may be then that they have two or more of these ADLs where they need extensive assistance, or now they have a cognitive impairment, or whatever happened to them. If they fell, now they have a lot of pain. You may need to assign them an aide that's on the nurse aide registry if those items are present. So I'm going to move on and go over this a little bit more. So the RN assesses the client and the care plan. She looks at those 5 ADLs, and here they are again. I just have a chart here. So the caregiver must be listed on the North Carolina Nurse Aide Registry if 2 or more ADLs require extensive assistance and there is a cognitive impairment present, or if 3 or more of the ADLs require extensive assistance. And any client that's total care, that's extensive assistance. The nurse aide or caregiver does not have to be on the registry if 3 or more of the ADLs require limited assistance. And I just defined limited assistance as they don't need help more than 50% of the time with any of those ADLs that we just looked at. This is a little bit better picture of it, but it's something that your nurse has to constantly keep in mind. This is another area where you all may misfire. I'll just say it that way. Your nurse goes out, she does the assessment, but there is a scheduler that assigns the aide or the caregiver to the client. Does that scheduler know these rules? Hopefully your nurse, when she does the assessment and she gets back with the plan of care, she will, if the scheduler is making the assignment, hopefully she will say, Miss Jones needs an aide on the nurse aide registry because of her care plan and the level of care. The nurse has to make that determination. So if you do not have those people talking to each other and someone transferring that information, that's where the scheduler may just say, oh, Jane lives down the street from Miss Jones and is right on her way to wherever. I'll just give this client to Jane. However, Jane may not be on the nurse aid registry, and this client may be someone that needs someone on the registry. So just make sure that communication between your nurse and your schedulers is back and forth all the time. That's basically what I had. I know that is a lot, but I've been getting lots of questions about it here lately. So I wanted to just come and try to clarify it again because it comes up all the time, especially when you get new nurses in your agency or new scheduler. You just need to let them know you can't, because in home care, we assign people by who lives the closest, who has a hole in their schedule. But this is another primary consideration that needs to be in there as you make those assignments in the state of North Carolina. Other states may not have this, but this is what our rules are. If you are licensed, these are the rules that you should follow. So are there any questions at this point about what I covered today?
Yes, Patty, hi, it's Phil Feldman. How are you?
Hey, Phil, good to see you.
Same here. A question, just in terms of assessing clients for their ADLs, have you had experiences where clients were kind of resistant to getting care and hid the fact that they really needed support with the ADLs? In other words, they're too proud. I don't want any help. I don't want somebody coming in here and watching TV with me and all that. Where their family was really driving the fact that they needed help, but they didn't want the help.
Yeah, Phil, usually that fight takes place with the family before the aides get there. Yes, usually, hopefully that has been resolved or talked out. Now, when the aide gets there, some of you have aides that are so good, clients will allow them to do things that they would never let their family do. I know I had aides that would go in there and they would be like, well, I usually don't let anybody help me with my bath. And these aides were so slick, as I would call it, they would start helping them and they would get a really good rapport. But I will say, Phil, most of the time, that is fought out with the family before the aides come in. But you may run into a client where they're just not going to let you help them at all. And they will say, well, we've had them say, you can just go home because I don't need any help. Meanwhile, they have food on their clothes, they need a bath, their place is a mess, they have laundry, but that's just a matter of time before they will probably receive help. But we have some really good aides that have great rapport and skills, and they can usually get clients to allow them to provide assistance.
Gotcha. Thanks, Patty. And then
Mhm.
in terms of if that kind of comes up during the assessment, are there maybe some specific tests that the nurse can do with the client to kind of bring out the fact that the help is really needed?
You mean the nurse go ahead and take care of that before the aide comes to get them to agree? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
when they do the assessment,
Mhm.
are there some tests that they can do that reflect the fact, maybe even to the client, that hey, you know what, you really need this help.
Well, it's still going to be limited by how stubborn that client may be.
I hear you.
Yes, I think nurses try really hard to make that happen. And then the nurse is going to continue to be involved. Once she sends the aide out there, that aide, we're talking communication again, that aide is going to communicate back with that nurse. And hopefully the nurse has seen that a little bit of that resistance and they can start to work out a plan and figure out how they're going to get the client to provide help. Now, this is what I used to say also. I had some Medicaid clients and some private clients, about 50-50. And I would tell my aides, when a client is so resistant to care and they do not want anyone to help them, usually they really don't need the care. Someone who really needs to take a bath or really needs their food fixed, that person is going to accept it if you come at them the right way. Especially I'm thinking of Medicaid clients. Sometimes Medicaid clients used to get approved for things that they really didn't need help with. I have no idea how that happened because we did not do the initial assessment. So you go out and start working with the client and they're like, I don't need any help with my bath, or I don't need help with this or that. That means that the assessment was not accurate, or that the status changed before the care started. So there's a lot of factors to consider. But if a person is resisting basic level care needs, is what we're talking about, they really may not need the help, or there may be a mental health issue or a cognitive impairment that needs to be addressed so that the care can move forward. Anyone else have a question about what we covered today about assigning the aides to the clients and keeping the scheduler and the nurse and the aides communicating with each other so that the assignments are appropriate? Okay, are there questions about anything that I didn't cover today? Because I will accept questions about anything that you all have. If you can think of something, just open your mic if you have something. So I wanted to state, as I always do, that I am very happy to come and provide this information to you all. This year is going to be every other month, but I want you to know that before you change any of your caregiver assignments, your rules, your policies, that you go directly to the governing authority and make sure that they authorize you, or that they say it's correct before you make a permanent change based on what I've told you here. I try to do great research and make sure that I'm giving you accurate information. You all know that I did this for a very long time, so I have a lot of experience in it, but I don't want you to make a mistake because we had a misunderstanding on these information calls. So if you all don't have anything else, I appreciate you all coming. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will get in touch with you all for the meeting. The next one will take place in June, but you all know how to get in touch with me, and you can have access to me at any time. So you all take care, and we'll be in touch. Thank you all.